Welcome to One Voice Evolving Season 3. This is our first episode, and today we're speaking with Alexandra Beller, who is a choreographer, director, educator, and currently writing 2 books, one that'll be released in May 2026. She blends somatic practice, rigorous inquiry, and creative freedom to help artists deepen their process and unlock new possibilities. So, what does that have to do with advancing racial equity in our lifetime, especially for white women over 40? Well, let me tell you. She thinks that the greatest need right now for white women is to develop the capacity to stay in discomfort without collapsing, bypassing, or taking over. And with the somatic work that she's done and her dance background, she is the most relatable, raw, and real guest I could have had on to help us connect the dots between where white women pull back because they're afraid to do it wrong, or because that we're not all like that, or because we just don't know what to say and we don't want to hurt or overstep, and how to embody both our own personal healing, but then to bring it back out in resilience into the world to make a difference. You are going to love this episode and you're going to love this season, and I already am. So please welcome Alexandra Beller. You can find her on the internet and watch till the end for her contact information. What we wanted to talk about today, mostly after you tell us a little more about yourself, is how your dance background and your somatic work and what you understand about the body and the nervous systems and trauma responses, how that intersects with the work that white women who want to advance racial equity are trying to do in this climate, in this country, in today's world. Um, and how do those intersect? Because you would think they would not be in the same dance space at all, and yet you found a way.
Small question. Just start off small, right?
Phew.
Um, well, I think the through line between somatics is the body-mind connection and how we sense ourselves from the inside, interoception, and how we can shift and sometimes control the way that things are moving inside the body with our mind. So a very simple version of that is when we adjust our breath, right? That the breath is the one bodily function that crosses this between the unconscious and the conscious mind. It's the only thing that we have in the body that is both unconscious and conscious. And so it is a through line in the brain from a lot of deeper stuff, which is where a lot of trauma lives, to this more conscious and relational part of us, this conscious mind. So when we control the breath through breath work, that's a somatic activity, as are many other ways that we invite the mind into the body. It's a way to sense and feel ourselves, get to know what's authentic, get to know the inner landscape that sometimes is murky or hidden. That is also a place where our inherited racism, stereotype, bias lives. It's a place where all of that conditioning that we received from early childhood through every single day we exist right now in media and other people and certainly politics. So all of that, all of the ways that the systems get reinforced, and by systems I mean white supremacy and misogyny and heteronormativity and all of the ableism and all of the systems that we live inside, those systems get reinforced and create structure inside of us. And in order to change the way we think and observe and respond, we need to move things around on the inside to move things around on the inside, we need to understand the inside and how to move things. And so just the act of changing your breath is an act of shifting something on the inside with your mind. And that is an essential first component. There are a lot of components to anti racism and anti all the isms. Um, a lot of it is, being able to observe on the outside how things are operating, cause and effect, and, using logic and analysis to observe the world and say, oh, well, this plus this equals that, but this plus this doesn't equal that. Okay, so those maths are not the same. And, so we have to be able to look on the outside and see systems. And that's a fairly cerebral and analytical activity. And that's one that commonly happens in anti-racism work. Look at the way this person's treated in this situation and the way this person's treated in the same situation. Those are not the same. That's not justice. Let's change the system. Let's legislate around it, make rules around it, etc. That's all outer work and all essential. But there's inner work that needs to happen, and that part often doesn't get talked about nearly as much. And the inner work is I need to really look inside and shine the light on how the system has sculpted me. And if
Mhm.
I can't see the inner sculpture of racism and sexism and homophobia and all of that inside myself, I can't move anything. So I can go to a protest and hold up a sign, and I can fight for the rights of others on the outside and feel that I'm doing a great job, and I am doing something, absolutely. But there's work that I have to do on the inside, and it requires me knowing myself, and it's a lot scarier work in a lot of ways than, fighting on the outside. And they both need to be done. I can't just sit here and rework my insides and then sit on my bum. I've got to, do something in the world with it.
Uh-huh.
But I do think a lot of us are taking action in the world before we've taken action inside our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because it's so much easier. It's so much easier. Performative is so much easier than transformative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think not all the work done on the outside is performative. Certainly, like you stand up for somebody in a meeting, or you say, shine the light on somebody, or you spend your money in better places and don't tell anybody about it. You can, do real action on the outside. And of course, sometimes it can be performative, and sometimes it's real, and that's necessary work. And it is has to be bolstered by that inner work. And when we talk about the continued work of anti-racism, I think what we're often talking about but not naming as explicitly as we could is inner work to undo the sculpture of the inside of us that got crafted by this conditioning in our education, in the books we read, the movies we watched, the ads we saw, the way
Mhm.
that people talk to each other, the way we watched people get treated, and we grew up with that. And it's not possible to just have a logical thought, that's not fair, that's not equitable. There's
Mhm.
all this inner stuff that is shaped by that. And not only for white people, this is
Mhm.
for all of us, right? We're all shaped by this system. Now, if you grow up, as a person of color or somebody that's, in a marginalized community, racially or otherwise, and you have some authenticity in the home that helps to reject some of that coding and conditioning, you maybe grow up with less of that inner sculpture. But I think we're all ingesting a lot of the same media and material that conditions us. So all of us need to do this inner work to say, from the inside, where is my bias, my stereotype, my racism, um,
Mhm.
my fear?
Mhm. And where did I get it and who said so? Yeah. So I'd like for our conversation today to take two levels. The first level is I want to just go with right where you are and what are the practical applications of what you do and helping us deconstruct that inner landscape. And then I want to be able to and I want to share it now so I don't forget it later. I want to be able to tap into, and what does that say about generational trauma or DNA and how things are from from my great grandmothers are residing in my cellular level that I have no control or have had
Mhm.
no control or conscious knowledge of, because I think you've done this work long enough and widely enough that I'll bet you've got some threads of how to weave that in.
Yeah, well, I do think that the first step in this inner work is um, an adventure and a journey into this uncharted territory. And so there are, I would say, probably infinite ways, many ways into the body. Certainly, lots of somatic practices will get you there. None of them, some of them require money, but many of them don't. Laying in on your floor with your feet in the floor and your knees up and your hands on your belly and your eyes closed and
Mhm,
just feeling your breath and listening to the inside of your body is one, free and available practice to all of us.
mhm,
Um, Movement, and letting yourself move freely without restriction or apology or inhibition. Authentic movement is another way to start to get to know yourself. But I think that what we're looking for ultimately is that we have enough sense of the inner map that when we are in a situation where discomfort arises, we know how to enter the body, not defensively, but with curiosity, and say, "Ooh, when that person said that, I just got a knot in my stomach. Let me tune into the knot in my stomach. Yeah, I'm feeling really scared right now because this person is bringing up an idea about me that I really don't like, and it's coming into conflict with an idea that I have about myself. And the idea that I have about myself feels like it's acting as a protector. And I need to like sit with this and see what it's protecting. So then there's inner work. Now, in general, there's not enough time during an actual interaction in real time to do this work. So this is a moment to be like, I'm going to put a post-it on this, or I'm going to earmark this and say, I'm having a conversation right now with a person. This person has said something that has activated some emotion in me, and I'm feeling it physically. I'm noticing these physical symptoms. I'm noticing discomfort. I know that it can be a habit of mine to uh, get a little defensive or protect. I don't want to feel that. And I don't know what it is yet. And I don't have time to go into it. So I'm going to shoo it away in some way. And it's either by dismissing what this person is saying, AKA probably gaslighting them, or deflecting it onto somebody else or something else, or excusing it in some way. And I want to get out of this. I don't feel comfortable. I don't like this feeling. I need to get out. I'm going to abandon this moment. So, to my mind, the practice in that moment is not necessarily to go all the way through the process, because there's probably not time and you have somebody else who has needs in this moment. And so for me, the thing to do is say, I'm having discomfort. I'm having a physical response. It's bringing up anxiety and things I don't even have time to name right now. I do not want to take that out on this person. Maybe coming up with a thing that you say that's almost a code for yourself, that's even a constructed sentence like, this is giving me a lot to think about. I'm going to need some time to metabolize this. I promise that I'm going to do that work, but it's going to take more time than I have in this conversation. So I'd like to just put a pause on this because I need more time to do some work on myself to think about what you're saying. Can we put a placeholder on this? I promise that I'll go really consider what you're saying and then come back to you for part two of this conversation. How would that feel to you? Or is that okay for you? Is there anything else you need in this moment? that doesn't require going deeper into this conversation because I need to do some work before I'm ready to come back to this conversation from a really grounded and healthy place. What do you need to be able to do that? If you had something that was a little bit constructed in your head, and you were able to, like, in a moment even of emotional flood, to be able to pull that sentence out and say, this is the moment when I need to do that placehold sentence and
Right.
take care of this person that's in front of me without kind of pushing myself faster than I'm ready to go, right? Which is a non-consensual thing you're doing to yourself. We're not trying to throw ourselves under the bus in a way that, doesn't allow us to stay truthful and authentic and whole and available. I'm not trying to kind of meet somebody else's needs and abandon my own needs. That's not the way forward. That's not going to get me far enough. I need to be able to respond to this person in front of me in a way that feels thoughtful and held and considered to them, and afford myself the time that it takes to be real with these feelings. And so I think in general, like, uh, noticing the feelings, responding to them in a way that doesn't just turn the attention to myself, but also doesn't abandon myself, making sure that I have a way to take care of this other person while creating more time for myself to feel and metabolize and process, maybe in privacy. Yeah. So does that feel like that hit part one?
It did, and it made me think about how white women center ourselves. Well, not all white women, right? How we do that. And if we haven't done that, if that inner work isn't second nature, then our first nature is the defense response that says, I don't want to feel that, and you're making me feel that. So we're going to change the topic, or we're going to change the tone, or we're going to change your presentation of your truth, or we're going to focus on my discomfort now from what all of those things that happen that are simply unresolved body trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be helpful sometimes to turn it around and be like, okay, what if I was the person who had, felt injured, and I was facing, let's say, a straight white man, and there was some harm that I felt, and I was calling them out on that harm. And I
Yeah.
was saying, like, I don't think you understand how dangerous it feels to walk around in a female presenting body. And,
Mhm.
and imagine what you would like them to say if they were doing the work on themselves, but they couldn't quite get there in the moment. And if that, straight white man said to you, wow, yeah, I need to spend some time thinking about that. I really want to understand that better. Would you be willing to give me a little time to, like, go off and process this and really try to get into understanding this better, and then come back and ask you more questions and hear you more, and do part two of this conversation? I feel like I don't want to be reactive. I need to do some inner work, and I don't want to be reactive with you. Like, what would you like to hear in that moment?
Yeah.
Figure out how to be able to say that in that moment in a way that really honors this person, but doesn't just trample over your own feelings. And I don't mean that we need to center the feelings of fear and anxiety that are coming up. What I mean is that those feelings are a portal to your bias and that inner sculpture that we were talking about. Those feelings are a way in to get to see what's under there. And we
Right.
don't always have easy portals, right? Like, we get intellectual about it and we're trying to trace into the body, but really we're just going through the mind. So when we have these moments of discomfort, those are great opportunities, I believe, where suddenly, like, part of the body has made a little gap or a little opening to get deeper.
Mhm.
And that always requires time. That going in deeper, it always requires time. That
Mhm.
time is not something that you necessarily have while in conversation, and it's not work that that other person needs to be there for. That's my work to do, so I should do that on my own time. right? And I don't need that person to be my therapist or my guide or my facilitator in that moment. That moment is a place for me to say, ooh, that's a portal in. That is a place I need to do some work and think. I'm going to go do that and I'm going to come back to you. And to me, that strikes the balance between not centering yourself, but
Mhm.
also not like that moment when you're feeling discomfort. That's not just going to go away in a heartbeat because we'd like it to, right? That is an invitation. And the
Mhm.
invitation is not an invitation out, it's an invitation in.
Mhm.
And that requires me taking the time to do that.
Mhm.
And so I think that that discomfort needs to be not an alarm, but a doorbell.
Right. Good. Okay, so after the fact, when you're alone, how do you bring that back up and find
Yeah.
and
So if it were me, I would create as safe a space as possible, meaning no one's knocking on the door, my ringer's off, I'm in the most comfortable part of my, some space I can get to, a place that I feel some emotional safety. I would go back into that conversation in my mind. I would try to bring myself to the moment when that physical sensation started happening in the
Mhm.
body. When I felt that knot in my stomach, I would remember this person saying something to me that suddenly got me feeling anxious, or my skin got hot, or I got tingly, my shoulders got tight, I got a knot in my stomach, my breath was shallow. Whatever the sensations were, I'm going to try to bring my body back into that place and remember, whatever it will activate those feelings again, the look on their face, tone in their voice, the words they used, and being like, oh yeah, and then I got really uncomfortable and nervous. Great, let's go back into that.
Mhm.
And to me, it feels almost like train tracks. Like once I start following the sensation of like, okay, so there's my skin is a little tingly and hot, my shoulders got tight and they started to lift up. Let me relax some of those sensations because those are protections, and soften the body and deepen the breath and follow the tracks inward. I'm searching now for another feeling or a thought. I feel worthless. I feel like I'm all wrong. Everything I do is wrong. Nobody likes me. I'm going to be all alone. That's not about racism. That's about my childhood. Like I'm following that down to a much deeper, more core feeling that
Mhm.
really has nothing to do with anybody else and certainly doesn't have to do with identity or
Right.
race or, ideology. Those are
Mhm.
feelings that are about me and my life. And when this person said, I don't think you act like you are standing up for other people, but when push comes to shove, I don't see you doing the work. And
Mhm.
when they said that to me, all these physical sensations happened. And when I followed those physical sensations, I felt small and useless and worthless, and these very challenging feelings and little. And oh, yeah, those aren't about anything that person said. Those are my feelings that live
Mhm.
in my body about my life and my childhood, and those are really core feelings.
Mhm.
Once we get down to that and we see the connective tissue between our shame,
Yeah.
grief, fear,
Mhm.
smallness, worthlessness,
Mhm.
and we say, oh, when somebody challenges this constructed identity that I have, those feelings get activated. But those feelings are not about that person or that situation, those are just mine. So
Mhm.
just seeing that connective tissue sometimes
Mhm.
can do a lot already to resolve the thing. So then the next time you're there and you get the knot in your stomach and the skin, you're like, oh, this is my worthlessness. Oh, yeah, this is right. Okay. So you're challenging something about, Okay, let me just see if I can breathe into this while this is happening this time
Mhm.
and say, yeah, I'm having a little bit of that stuff is coming up. That's not about this conversation. Let me just see if I can stay with this conversation this time and recognize that I've got like a little bit of shame cycling in the back. But let me just see if I can stay in this conversation now. So, like the next time, and I mean, it may take many rounds of this before that happens in real time. But eventually, the hope is that in real time, when we feel that discomfort in the body, we can recognize pretty immediately this discomfort is not about this conversation or this topic. This discomfort is like a core discomfort. You're challenging something of a mask that I have constructed that protects me all the time in the world. And you're saying, I don't think that that's quite real.
Mhm.
I think that that is something that you've constructed to protect yourself. And now you're having the feelings, I'm having the feelings of what I'm protecting. I'm protecting myself. I don't want the world to feel my uselessness or my worthlessness or my shame. And so I'm like, I'm a social justice warrior and I'm here to protect the world and I'm a good person. I'm a good person. And when you're saying, I think you've got work to do in this area, what I hear is, you're not a good person. And so
Mhm.
suddenly that mask gets compromised and all of that shame and stuff I don't want the world to see. And I spend so much time protecting myself from letting anybody see that. Feels like it's just going to come down and everyone's going to see me ugly, naked in
Mhm.
front of everybody. But it's not, it doesn't have to be that, right? We can do that work on the ego in titrated ways. Like we can take little bites out of that ego and say, let me, a little bit of CBT work, a little bit cognitive behavioral therapy work, and a little bit of work to say, okay, what is this conversation? You're talking about something I said in a faculty meeting,
Mhm.
and you're expressing that I had an opportunity to stand up in a way that I claim to want to do or claim to be doing in my life, and I didn't do it. Can I sit with that without dropping into this deep void? Because that's also a choice, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I do think we need to go in there in the privacy of our own time and space to learn it.
Yeah.
But that is not useful to the person that needs repair in front of us. So knowing that that's happening, but not following it in real time and saying, yeah, there's something else being activated here. That's for me for later. Let me try to stay in this conversation now in an authentic and embodied way
Yeah.
that I didn't used to be able to do because I wasn't aware that that was, so that was so attached to this conversation. I just felt all of it. When you said that, I felt my shame. Now you say that, I feel some sensations. I'm like, oh, there is some shame coming up. That's for me later. Let me see if I can stay with this. That I feel like is the work that I aim to be able to do. Um, and sometimes in that conversation, there's harm coming towards you as well. It's not everyone's not some magical perfect communicator, right? And sometimes things get said in a way that um there is some hurt there. You did say something with some bite, and I am not that you're not allowed to have feelings anytime, right? But yeah, that you were trying to hurt me there. You were angry and you there was part of you that was trying to hurt me there. I can also do some work to just understand why and accept it. And if there's something that needs to be repaired on another end, I can
Mhm.
also do that at another time, not now, but
Mhm.
say like, at some point, can we have a conversation about the way that that got communicated? I'd love to see if we could make that a little more functional for both of us in the future. But
Yeah.
that's not a now conversation.
Yeah.
Now the moment is for me to modulate my own body
Mhm.
to receive and respond and really listen and observe, but not go into it.
Yeah. Your ability to describe introspective awareness is unlike anyone I've met.
Mm.
And what you are describing is mirroring what I have experienced in decades of healing from, chronic PTSD and disassociation from my body and EMDR that was a magical cure, magical. And and I know that it's layers and layers. And as I just moved into the racial equity work for real a couple of years ago, as a dedicated practice, I'm revisiting all of those previous healing modalities and going, oh, this is being in this body in this time with this work is completely different than the last time I heard the word introception, for example. That's yeah, I've only heard that one other time, and that was when I was learning intuitive eating, when I stopped dieting 7 years ago. And I had no idea. And when I went through the steps, I work with Evelyn Tribole, and when I went through the steps of intuitive eating and I got to the one about being in your body, about going to the gym, took me 5 years of work, of resistance, of whatever that was. I now go to the gym 5 days a week and I have no F's to give about what anybody thinks. I only know how I feel in the moment.
Yeah.
And it's different every day and it's perfect. But I had no concept of what interoception was. But when I started doing the body work, and I've done some somatic work, not a lot, it felt to me like returning to the scene of the crime. And
Mhm.
it's no wonder I did everything to stay in my head. I
Yeah.
did everything to mask and hold the line and be still, be quiet, and don't make waves, and not care about politics, and not care about what I couldn't control. I mean, I was a pro at
Yeah.
staying out of the fray. Now it's like this magnet, earth magnet, pulling me. There goes my hand, pulling
Oh,
me, pulling me into a fight I didn't ask for and that I cannot look away from.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that staying in the head is what also keeps us in a lot of the binary thinking because the head is more like Jenga. I'm going to pick this one block and I'm going to move it and I'm going to rebalance. I'm going to move that. And the somatic work is like a hike in a forest. Like
Yeah.
there's no path. You you could go anywhere. Everywhere's going to get you somewhere. There's, different pockets, different landscapes, different threats that you don't know where they are, different beautiful things and you don't know where they are, where you're going to land. And depending on how it feels for you to go into the unknown, that forest could feel exciting and enticing and adventurous, or it could feel really frightening and you could feel a lot of resistance. I'm not going to go into a forest. I don't know. I could get lost and I don't know where I'll end up and I don't know what's going to be in there. And that doesn't seem safe, right? So, um, it is very tempting, and I do think that there are plenty of people in the anti-racism field that are almost entirely in their heads, and that's where I think we get this all or nothing thinking, and I do think it's where some of the like over policing of language and that kind of stuff comes from. It's this very like cerebral, these are the 98 things that you can never say and then your work is done. And it's
Right.
like I I just yes, of course there are things we need to leach from language, like of course. That's true, right? And lots of phrases and statements that we're trying to, change our whole system of language so that we take away things like grandfathered in, like okay, that's got origins and enslavement. So let's get rid of that one. And yes, we need to be careful about all that stuff. But I feel like folks in anti racism who stay entirely in their heads, that is to some degree the beginning and end of the conversation. Just like what you can say and what you can't say, and the way you can say it, the way you can't say it, places you can go and places you can't go. And it's all this binary thinking. And while I definitely think that that doing that structural work is important and useful and can create better containers, and better models. It's what we're feeling and what we really believe on the inside that needs the most shift. And if I haven't shifted the way that systemic racism and white supremacy and misogyny, et cetera, has shaped me, if I'm not looking at it, fixing it on the inside, I can say all the right words, I can put my money in the right places,
Mhm.
but I'm not really there.
Yeah. Yep. Not the hearts and minds. Yeah. Yeah. So, so for me, I'm somebody who was completely disassociated. You're somebody who has been embodied most of your, and I'm going to assume from childhood. How how have those layers unfolded for you? I'm curious.
In
Because your awareness is so,
Within the container of
yeah,
anti-racism.
okay, sure. Or whatever else that led you to that place, right? But how has it changed your trajectory? Did it take you half as long to get there as it did me because you've always moved in your body? Or is that mine just the way it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do the work where we can do it, when we can do it, and when we're ready for it. And I don't think, it's particularly faster or slower. Um, I do think that, like, when I think back to 2020, we're at the beginning of COVID hitting the States. George Floyd was murdered, and there was a resurgence, a reanimation of Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, lots of protests happening in the streets. And at that moment, I started teaching a somatic practice online every week. So a lot of the people that were coming to my class are people that are in a similar um, political mindset as me, and many of them were out in the streets protesting and then coming to class, and needing that class to be something that recovered them and bolstered them so that they would have the strength to go back out and fight again. And so we were working in class on some of the skills that we needed out in the street. And one thing that we talked about was a concept in Bartenieff called stability mobility, which is really noticing where you need to anchor, ground, contain something, and where something gets to be free and mobile. And the thing that is supporting you changes depending on what needs to move. So this is something that's true in the body, but of course, it's also true in the mind and in political systems. So if we look at systemic racism and white supremacy, and the entrenchment of it in our history, we're looking at hyperstability of a system. And a lot of people whose whole goal is to maintain the stability of that system. When we're looking at something like protest and revolution and, the Black Lives Matter movement, we're talking about something that's trying to hyper mobilize, make big change. And so
Mhm.
we're looking at something that's hyper stable and something that's hyper mobile, and they are colliding. And so, what does that mean inside the body? And what does the body need to be able to meet that moment? And what I felt like in my teaching, but also in my experience of my body, is that I needed more nuance to my stability mobility relationship as a body. I believe that what we practice in the body, we're practicing in all other systems of our life. I believe the body is the baseline, and when we make a change in the body, it automatically changes the psyche, the spirit, the communication, the way we interact with others, our movement through the world. So if I could create more nuance between what is holding and what is freeing, what is stabilizing and what is mobilizing, I can create that in my head, and then I can also help create that or join in to try to create that in the world. So, in the body, that means something like playing with weight shift at a very subtle level. So if you stood up and closed your eyes and didn't grip anywhere, like the glutes, the bum muscles, or the thighs, or the abdomen or lower back, if I'm not gripping anywhere, but I am maintaining myself at standing, I'll notice that I'm swaying a little bit. I'm making this little, maybe a figure of eight, maybe another slight, shape. But I'll notice that if I don't hyperstabilize, there is this dynamic alignment in the body. That dynamic alignment also exists in the mind and the way we think. If we stop gripping a thought and holding on to something that we think of as a truth and let things move, thoughts will move, ideas will move, sensations and feelings will move. And it's not a violent or coercive shift. It's allowing things to settle and continue to find balance through mobility. So dynamic alignment is a neurological idea. Dynamic alignment is the body's equilibrium response. The body doesn't stay in balance by staying still. The body stays in balance by slightly moving and then slightly moving in a different direction, and something else moves away from that, and something else moves away from that. And so this constant micro granular movement inside the body is a neurological truth to every single human body. That's how our system works, right? So if we closed our eyes and we weren't gripping and we were feeling this little sway, and then we took like one body part slightly off that vertical stack, we'd start to fall. Something else would start to pull in a different direction. We could just start doing a really small improvisation, little dance. Doesn't even need to leave the footprints of the floor, but probably eventually it would want to be taking a step, and then when that weight wanted to shift, taking another step, and eventually we might want to open our eyes to feel a little safer inside of it. But doing that improvisation of shifting weight is a way to start repatterning the body towards micro shift, micro change, balance, attuning to the environment, attuning to what's around us. And that is a way to start healing towards equity.
Mhm.
And I think that, I mean, you're asking about my personal experience. I do think that having that practice already established, of course, that was not my first moment of thinking about anti racism. I grew up in New York and I danced in the Bill T. Jones Ari Zane Dance Company, which is a very diverse group of people. And we faced, we went to countries like South Africa where we faced a lot of, pushback against the visual of this very diverse company doing lots of like very physical athletic work and partnering and same-sex partnering and gender disruption, etc. So this has certainly been something that's been part of my physical, emotional, and mental intellectual practice forever.
Mhm.
But I will say that when George Floyd was murdered and we were going through these protests, and there was new language I was hearing from friends of mine about white people and white women in particular, and a new tone to the language that was coming out. And I absolutely found myself having feelings and being activated and feeling flooded sometimes by seeing a post by somebody that was a really close friend of mine saying, F all these fake ass white, blah, blah, like, and
Mhm.
things that felt like, well, but I thought that but I feel hurt right now. And then I was like, you're not allowed to feel hurt. You can't feel hurt. That's bad. That's, white fragility. And, I kind of got wires crossed sometimes in saying, like, okay, just because we're not giving these feelings back to that person, and just because I'm not posting them on Facebook, and just because I'm not centering them in the conversation, doesn't mean that I should just repress and deny that I'm having any feelings, because that's not going to be useful. And I definitely had a lot of work to do in that moment of our shared history to say, like, what do I do with these feelings? Because some of them feel intellectually reasonable. Like this is a close friend of mine and they're saying something that feels like it is about all white women, of whom I'm one. And so that then I feel like my friend is saying this particular thing about me, and this thing they're saying is really mad. They seem really mad at me. And I feel hurt. And then I feel mad because I feel hurt. What do I do with all those feelings? Well, I certainly knew enough not to take it to that person, but I did have work to do to not just say, you're not allowed to have those feelings. Those feelings are bad feelings. They mean you're a bad person. And those feelings mean you haven't done the work. Those
Mhm.
feelings are just your racism. And you need to just swallow them, suck it up, and do the work and not feel anything. That's not the way. That's
Mhm.
not going to get me forward, right? So I do feel like I took my somatic practice in that moment to say like, okay, what is an authentic way to acknowledge that those feelings are happening, mostly so that they don't interfere with the work I'm trying to do.
Mhm.
Not to center those feelings and put them on a pedestal, but I found myself for a while just saying those feelings mean you're a bad person.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, there's my work. There's my work to do. And that's the work I took into my body in that moment to say, yeah, I'm feeling activated by that post I saw. I'm feeling hurt.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, Again, let me follow that feeling down into my body. Does that mean that that person couldn't have said that thing in a slightly more whatever kind of way? No, sure, they could have, but they didn't. And they don't have to, right? And they're having feelings and they're in a heightened moment and they said it the way they needed to say it. All things being equal, like that person and me are out to lunch together, the two of us, and they say something in that, really biting tone directly to me about me, maybe I come back to them and say, wow, you sound really angry. Are you angry at me in particular? Is it anger in general? Like what's happening for you right now? Because it sounds like you're really angry and I'm taking it to mean you're angry at me, and I'd love to clarify if that's true. And if that's true, then talk about why. And so, if I were face to face and it really was coming directly at me, but, if post on Facebook, I'm going to be like, yeah, you're having feelings and you've posted your feelings. And that is absolutely your right. And now I'm having feelings from reading the post, and those are mine to deal with. And I do get to deal with those feelings. I do get to consider them. I don't just have to shove them in a corner because that's not really going to help anybody's work going forward. And I think that's where I had a lot of work to do in that particular moment, was not to judge myself for having feelings, but also not to put them on a pedestal.
2020, George Floyd, that's when I started deconstruction. 3 months later was when I started to experience the backlash from Black women creators for my white skin, daring to try to demand more learning, to want to know more, to want. I had no idea, didn't know what I didn't know because I've never been in this arena before. Unprecedented is my least favorite word, but it started in 2020. And about that time, I started looking around at a lot of women my age. And I now work with white women over 40, but back then it was over 60. And then we've bumped it down 10 years and 10 years. But because many of us were in the same place, we wanted to help. We wanted to make meaningful change. We have wisdom, we have resources, we have time and energy, but we did not feel welcome. We did not feel equipped, and we did not have a place that we collectively knew how or where to go get equipped. So we were all winging it. In your white bubble, you can only expand that thought bubble so big by yourself. So you
Mm-hmm.
can't we couldn't do this work alone. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until this last election cycle when we so did not stand up the way we needed to as white women. And when the Black creators stood back and said, we're taking, we're not coming. Y'all got to figure that out. Y'all figure it out. Best thing they ever did, hardest work we've ever done. But even now, those white women that couldn't, wouldn't, or wanted to, but just, we fell by the wayside, have not re-engaged. How would your somatic approach address women who in 2020 were there and, through a variety of conditioning and inner and outer and turmoil and future trauma and compound trauma and whatever, coming back at it now,
Yeah.
this podcast, if they've been on the sidelines and
Yeah.
look, this has come across their feet again, where can we pick them up?
Well, I think, and I'm sure that there would be folks who would vehemently disagree with me about this, and that would be a really interesting conversation to have. I'd be really open to hearing that side. But I'm going to say that I do think that from a somatic perspective, it can sometimes be an easier way in through a shared experience. And right now, the female body is under such attack,
Mhm,
um, in a similar way that Black and brown bodies have, forever been under attack.
mhm,
And I think sometimes the shared experience of threat can help us to find that embodied empathy, so that going into your own experience of like, all of these horrible things, legislation and the way people are talking and the freedom that people have to try to control and coerce and assault my body, what is that feeling in my body? Oh, yeah, I feel that feeling. Let me start to reach out, still holding that feeling, and imagine being, so I'm imagining my white female body against the birthing system. Now, with these statistics that I know about what happens to Black and brown bodies in the birthing system, let me imagine what I experienced. And then, oh, wow, even more disbelief, even more gaslighting, even more contempt.
mhm,
Oh my God. And then look at um, those maternal death statistics and infant mortality statistics. Look at I already feel like I'm not getting the job and I'm not getting compensated. And then look at the statistics for Black and brown women. Oh my God. Like that, sometimes going through your own sensation of oppression, but then starting to like open out from there, where you're in this embodied feeling of, I know what that feels like. And then let me start to widen my bubble to
mhm,
bring what would it feel like if, that rather than going from this intellectual place of like, I'm trying to imagine if I, and then such a common thing like, well, I can never know what it's like to, right? And of course, no, I can never know what it's like to be a Black woman or a Black man. I can never know what it's like to be a man. I can never know all kinds of things. We could start and end there, but that's not really getting us any closer to anything. So I find that thought line mood.
uh-huh,
Yes, I will say I can never truly understand what it's like to be a wheelchair user.
mhm,
And how can I try? What's the closest I can come to imagining it? And for me, imagining it intellectually doesn't get me there, but going from a shared sense of oppression, but then trying to widen and widen and widen the bubble to start to include more information and imagining more things
mhm,
brings my body into that place where, I know what it's like to walk down the street and have men act a certain way. What if that kind of possessive gaze that men have on my body on the street, what if white women looked at me that way, looked at my hair that way, looked at my skin that way? What if, like, so just starting to translate things that I do know in my body and then put myself in slightly larger, more expanded situations, I think can sometimes help get our body into more kinesthetic and embodied empathy.
yeah, yes. Yes. And I do know that where the mind goes, the body follows.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine it and you can feel it, then your body, it's real.
Yeah.
This is real world. In my ignorance, when we started this, I
Yeah.
thought that the female connection of subjection
Hmm.
was enough to bond us.
Right.
But you had just described it so beautifully, and taking it the next step of saying, this was my experience, but what if? Oh yeah.
And again, like first thing that we
Allow
were
yourself
saying,
to feel
right?
your imaginatory what if.
Yeah. And that just the very first interoceptive description that I was giving in the very beginning of this podcast, where we're talking about following the train track into the body, we can all also follow that sensation of like, okay, I'm walking on the street, these men are hungry, I feel this threat, I feel myself tighten up, I feel claustrophobic, like those sensations we can we can start to translate, and it's not, as you said, it's not, well, that's my experience, so then that's your experience, that's the beginning and end of it. No, but when we get down to the core feeling of like, oh, I feel so tight and so small and so like I just want to create a force field around me, I want to hide, I don't want people doing whatever it is they're doing, that embodied sensation. Forget about it's men, it's this, it's that, it's fatness, it's ableism, like forget about the identity things. Those are cerebral. The core feeling, that's something that can be translated, like, and do I know what it's like to be in your body? No, I don't know what it's like to be in any body except for mine. And I never will. But I do think that when we get to the deepest levels, ironically, the most personal, most inner levels, that's where we actually are the most similar, right? So the deeper we go into the personal body, the more I think we actually do find each other.
Mhm. Mhm. And ourselves.
Yeah, by finding ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Alexandra, what do you do now? Do you, for our guests, for me, if you're in New York, you still do live dance somatic movements? Do you do things online? Do you coach one-on-one? Tell me about you. What do you
All
do?
of that. I do all of that. I create and teach workshops live and digitally. I teach every week, both live and online. I've got lots of recorded courses and workshops for different demographics, meaning not all for dancers, some for actors, some for regular human beings, who just want to get more in touch with their bodies. I do one on one client work with people's bodies. And that kind of work goes in every possible direction. I mean, really, we're trying to get you to be your most authentic, feeling, efficient self. And some people come in for pretty pragmatic, practical, physical things.
Mhm.
I feel like those things are always still threading into the deeper stuff. You learn how to sit down and stand up more efficiently when your hip has been hurting and now it's not hurting, but you're discovering your own ability to level change, and to learning how to stand up more easily, I think is instantly translatable into every other aspect of our life, including anti-racism. So I do all that. I still choreograph for theater, and I'm writing 2 books. So
I told them in the beginning what your two books are. What prompted the book writing?
I was doing so much. Feedback is a really important tenet of my relationship with artists. I think there's a lot of abusive practices we need to dismantle in giving feedback. Um, and Liz Lerman is a choreographer who developed a process of giving feedback called critical response process, which is an artist-centered process. So you reflect back things that were meaningful, moving, inspiring, exciting, and then the very next thing is questions from the artist. So they get to frame their feedback. And then the third step is neutral questions from the audience. And by neutral, I mean we've let go of opinion and we are getting really curious about the artist's work and trying to ask truly curious questions. And this is something that translates incredibly into anti-racism conversations when, you're not just meeting a statement with a statement and you're not trying to give an opinion in a question, but you're really, truly curious about why you feel that way. In any case, I found myself generating questions and questions and questions for artists that had let go of opinion. And I noticed this thing often happened in the room when I would ask a question about an artist's work, and everybody's posture would change, and the breath would change, and the focus would change, and people kind of lit up like, that's that's the question. And it got people back into their own body and in their own art to answer the question. So it turned them inward in order to think of what the answer was. And in thinking of the answer, they had a revelation about something they needed to discover about themselves. Right. So I said, oh, I should write down all these questions. And so I thought that the book was going to be a book of 1,000 questions about the artistic process. And then that didn't really feel vulnerable enough to me. And so I decided to make some statements as well. So then, essays came in, and then I was like, oh, I want to get them into bodies. So then an embodiment exercise, and it just ballooned out into this workbook about creative process and unlocking ourselves to ourselves.
And is that the one that's not that's coming out in August next year?
It's coming out in May 2026
Okay.
from
All right.
Bloomsbury. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So where do people find you? How do they get in?
My website, alexandrabellerdances.org. If you just Google my name, Alexandra Beller, I'm sure it'll come up pretty immediately. And all my stuff, library, lots of free stuff, classes, essays, etc. Lots of goodies on that website for use and download.
Well, I think we're going to bump you to the front of the pack for launching season 3 because that happens March 30th. And this is exactly the theme for season 3 is resilience reimagined. And this is the perfect launch for that. So thank you so much. Is there anything about resilience that you'd like to, as a parting thought, leave our guests with?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that actually. I talk about resilience a lot. I think we sometimes forget about the physics of resilience and we think of resilience as just strength. But resilience is actually adaptability. And I notice that when I'm resisting something, especially pain, my resistance is in yielding and letting myself get to the bottom of something. Resilience is how far we can stretch before we spring back up. So how much give something has before it kind of returns its energy back out into the world. And so if we don't have much resilience, things hit us and they kind of bounce off of us right away. If we have a lot of resilience, we'll be able to take things in, yield, surrender, give, receive. Receive, give meaning give way, and receive and take in before coming back out. And so that ability to let ourselves feel the difficult feelings that go down to the dark place, the bottom of the well, the shame place, allowing things to get closer and closer to that place. I'm imagining a trampoline and like the heavy object, the more give that trampoline has, the more spring it'll have as well. And I think sometimes we get into a definition of resilience that's brittle. And I'd like us to think about resilience as movement.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Opening clip. Thank you so much, Alexandra. You have been a pleasure and a unicorn, and it was my pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Kim.